Welcome to the Anthro Art Podcast, a space of anthropological insight connected to real-life situations. Here we explore topics of social inequality and inclusion, sustainability, and the social self. We aim to bring a more nuanced understanding of our world and its challenges, but also inspiration and ideas on how to solve them together. We hope you enjoy it.
The role of the anthropologist in ecological activism, the importance of a multiscalar and multi-situated approach and collaborative ethnography production. Abstract. It is necessary to reflect on the role of the anthropologist in denouncing realities that are often subalternised, with the role of changing them through initiatives and solutions proposed by the anthropologist, allowing us to reflect on the porosity between the spheres of activism and anthropology. To realize the implications and interconnections between different contexts, it is necessary to take a multiscalar and multi-sited approach. One of the fields most concerned with the interconnections between local, national, and international scales is environmental studies, and it is on this theme that the article focuses, mobilizing formal research to reach this goal. Introduction. In this essay, I intend to reflect on the anthropologist's position in relation to activism when he is in the field, in their ethnographic production, and, after carrying out these stages, when the study in a given context is over. To this end, it is necessary to reflect on the role of the anthropologist in denouncing realities that are often subalternized, with the role of changing them through initiatives and solutions proposed by anthropologists, allowing us to reflect on the porosity between the spheres of activism and anthropology. Due to the compression of time and space, much faster movement of people, ideas, and goods, not forgetting the role of the Internet, globalization processes have altered and created new relations of power and, consequently, inequality between different locations that are interconnected through power structures. In order to realize the implications and interconnections between different contexts, it is necessary to take a multiscalar and multi-sited approach. One of the fields most concerned with the interconnections between local, national, and international scales is environmental studies, and it is on this theme that I intend to focus, mobilizing Tsing's study and the Kopenawa and Albert's collaborative ethnography. There are issues that have a greater political component, and this is one of them, due to the critical situations we are experiencing in terms of climate change and the policies of exploitation of natural resources that are being employed around the world, having global environmental, social, and economic impacts, mainly affecting indigenous populations. For this discussion, I'm going to think about the role of the anthropologist in these situations, realizing how we can give back to the community in question, which made it possible for us to do this work by making time and attention available, taking into account the importance of the ethnography of the particular, of giving an account of the agency and voice of the most damaged individuals present in attitudes of resistance. The concept of culture is also an important component because, although there are risks in using it, as Abu Lughod says, it can be a political and economic tool through a process of differentiation, as can be seen in Davy Kopenawa's speech Legitimizing the Forest, in which the anthropologist will play a role in the construction, in collaboration, and dissemination of this concept and idea of the group into the public sphere. In the conclusion, I will summarize all these points, linking them more closely, arguing the great importance of anthropologists playing an active role in helping the most vulnerable communities through collaboration, crossing the spheres of activism and anthropology without ever forgetting the importance of establishing a balance between these spheres, so as not to produce biased anthropological knowledge. Anthropologist and activist, Mary, through his field experience working on the subject of human rights, questions the link between activism and anthropology, and ends up stating that by choosing a research topic, a location, and how to approach it, one is making a political and social stand. These spheres differ in the way they look at a given reality, so there will be different ways of producing and exposing knowledge about it. The speeches of NGOs and activists will be marked by a strong emotional component and urgency, using stories of specific individuals, drawing on their vulnerability and oppression. Academics, on the other hand, present a more complex and in-depth view of the realities they study, framing them within the social, political, and economic contexts in which they occur, considering local and transnational scales. But these differences don't mean that these spheres don't intersect, especially in areas where human rights are being violated. According to Mary, these visions complement each other because both activists gain greater knowledge of the realities they want to address, and anthropologists often learn about certain processes and realities that have been publicized by organizations and activists through their great expression in the media and the public sphere. The fact that anthropology deals with specific themes and places makes it possible to understand how global dynamics operate at a local level, affecting people's daily lives and how they resist and adapt to processes of oppression. The role of the anthropology is to expose all these dynamics, thinking of ways to change them through critical anthropology and positioning themselves as advisors, counselors, and activists, particularly when it comes to the rights of indigenous populations, as in the case with Singh, Kopanawa, and Albert. The idea of the future is very important for the ecological issue, since both of the studies I'm going to mobilize refer to this idea of uncertainty about the future and even pessimism, the fall of the sky, according to the Yaomami cosmology, if nothing is done. We must bear in mind, as Appadurai states when talking about the social construction of the future, that the way we think about the future is the result of the cosmology, religion, social, political, and historical norms that mold us. I wanted in this way not only to denounce the threats suffered by the Yanomami and the Amazon, but also as a shaman, to launch an appeal against the danger that the unbridled veracity of the people of merchandise is weighing on the future of the human and non-human world. At the same time, there is a feeling of hope, a capacity to aspire, in which anthropologists, when carrying out these studies, this is an aspect that is very visible in The Fall of Heaven, since the initiative for this book was David Kopanawa's, try to change this reality through actions of resistance and political mobilization, as Singh states when he points out the feeling of possible change present in the discourses of ecological activists in the struggle for indigenous rights in Indonesia. The importance of a multi-sited and multi-scalar approach. As mentioned earlier, it is necessary to understand power relations in a given place, since global connections will be visible in friction zones due to encounters and interactions that will shape and create power dynamics. The case of the rainforest in Kalimantan illustrates this argument. In the 1970s, in order to combat the economic crisis in Indonesia, a series of international initiatives and programs were created by the New Order to attract foreign investment, such as Japanese investment, Sogo Shosha. These national and international dynamics had repercussion on the increased exploitation of the rainforest for timber, with the Indonesian government focusing on international market transactions, rather than regulating the exploitation of natural resources, creating areas of wildness. By combining the multiscalar approach, understanding the dynamics between the macro and micro levels, and the multi-sited approach, the anthropologist is able to take account of these dynamics, leading to the emergence of ethical and methodological issues, such as the anthropologist's negotiation of these networks, given that they are terrains that require greater mobility and different identities. The global and the local are not contrasting, since it is the relationships and connections between different places that create the global. Ting, in his study of the impact of the destruction of the Indonesian rainforest in the 1990s, shows how the basic principle of capitalism proliferation will have brutal impacts on the landscape, both the natural and social landscape, as the indigenous Meratus Dayaks culture has been strongly impacted by all the changes that have taken place. The frontier becomes a separate space with its own dynamics and participants, such as indigenous populations, with their adaptations and resistance actions, national and international companies, and migrant workers, in the case of the Amazon gold miners, which will trigger conflicts. As he says, these dynamics are local, national, and international, since these individuals are governed by the logic of the global resource market. An ethnography of global connections denounces these dynamics, which are also found in a different way in Kopenhauer's, as it presents a cosmological vision of this process of destruction on the frontier. The micro and macro scales are not separate, and it is a relationship between them that creates the inequalities that will manifest themselves on these frontiers, affecting the daily lives and action of individuals, and only in this way can we understand how they act and resist these forces present in the context. The research is over. Now what? How to give back to the community? During fieldwork and even after the study has been completed, it is necessary to take into account the social relationships maintained between the researcher and the community and vice versa, because this will have an impact on the anthropologist's engagement in the context. As vaguely stated, the social relationships established between researcher and informant are very complex, because bonds can be created that go beyond hospitality, but which do not eliminate the different positions that both parties play in the production of knowledge about that reality. Davy Kopenhauer was aware of Bruce Albert's position of greater power in terms of dissemination, since he asked him to write the book based on his words. In this two-person work, I, the one who speaks and the one who writes, based on the ethnographic pact, they expose the case of the Yanomami community's vulnerability due to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest through the ontological vision, prophecy, without forgetting the local and global sociopolitical framework. This detailed and in-depth understanding of the Yanomami's cosmological vision was only made possible by Sitcher's 4 decades of long-term research, which allowed this community to be accompanied through the destruction of the place where they live and allowed a relationship of great complicity to develop between Davy and Bruce. The greatest advantage of this position for the anthropologist is that it gives people a voice, writing with them and not about them, based on Abel Logot's conceptualization of ethnography of the particular. The I of the narrator is inseparable from the we of the tradition and memory of the group to which he wishes to give voice. By focusing on the strategies and discourses of individuals, it is possible to present a dynamic and diverse picture of views on the processes of exploitation of natural resources and the implications they have for these people, demonstrating the tensions that exist. Another aspect to bear in mind is the role of the anthropologist in the construction of the very community they study. In other words, social scientists will play an important role in the creation, maintenance, and definition of groups, and how indigenous communities themselves can be aware of this fact, maximizing this process position of prominence in their favor. Ethnicity is a social, cultural, and political construct that is mobilized by individuals depending on the situations, and it is important to understand in which context it is mobilized, why, and by whom. As can be seen in various processes of political mobilization by various indigenous peoples around the world, there is a discursive construction of the category of culture, which can be dangerous because it can lead to stigmatizing and essentialist conceptions, according to Abu Lughod. Becoming a political and economic tool for legitimizing territories and the forest, as Kopanawa status, through the difference it makes between the Yanomami and the whites. That's why we want to protect the land we live on. Omama created it and gave it to us to live on, but the whites are trying to devastate it, and if we don't defend it, we will die with it. As you can see, there are several aspects that have been addressed, but all of them refer to reflection on the role of the anthropologist and their implication in the field and after fieldwork, bearing in mind the bonds of friendship that are developed that can go far beyond the anthropologist's time in the field. The way to give data and knowledge back to the community is through practical or applied anthropology, providing support in situations of greater socio-economic and humanitarian vulnerability through the process of collaboration in order to develop projects and initiatives that meet the intentions of those being studied, based on the ethic of possibility, presupposing a deeper involvement on the part of the researcher. Final thoughts. After this reflection, I would like to summarize the main ideas based on the quote from Anthropological Faithful Research is a profoundly human endeavor. Although these are studies with different approaches, in which it is visible how the capitalist system expresses itself differently in each social, political, and economic context. They have the same objective: to denounce the over-exploitation of resources and the destruction of the social and natural landscape. Because of these differences in looking at these processes, one from the point of view of someone who has experienced the consequences of social and natural devastation in the first person, emic, and the other based on fieldwork, I have emphasized one or the other more in certain aspects because certain ideas are more visible, such as the importance of global connections and how they are expressed in a particular place in Tsing and the collaborative work of Albert and Kopanawa. I want to argue that in contexts where the ecological issue is present in such a brutal way, it is not possible to differentiate between the sphere of anthropology and activism, because these are contexts where the choice itself is already a political position. Long-term research provides a more detailed view of the processes that take place on these frontiers through a multiscalar and multi-situated approach, thus presenting a dynamic and processual view that Hutchinson advocates in order to look at these ethnic groups as no longer isolated, independent. The emotions and bonds established with the people affected cannot be obscured from this reflection because they have an impact on the degree of involvement on the part of the researcher. I found myself caught in their emotions and quite properly, I think, unable to produce a dispassionate account. Giving voice to these individuals demonstrates an emic-ontological vision in which it is possible to present alternative discourses and practices of ways of being, and consequently of ways to change the future to the general public, and not just to academia, before it is too late. The time has come, in short, we have an obligation to take absolutely seriously what the Indians say through the voice of David Kopanawa, the Indians and all the other lesser peoples of the planet. Another aspect I drew attention to was the fact that the anthropologist has an ethical duty to be deeply engaged in the public sphere by working closely with the community in question, taking into account how they will use the anthropologist's position of mediator and disseminator in situations of political mobilization and social action. Example, by asking for their help to integrate and guide projects, in order to achieve their projects according to Ortner's conceptualization of agency, by maintaining categorizations constructed for this purpose, such as culture, and the idea of distinct ethnic groups. As Valde Almeida stated, the social scientist is a hybrid agent who has a political voice, and although we must try to change and propose solutions to something that has negative consequences, we must not become immersed in the activist aspect, because otherwise we produce something biased. A balance is needed, because if you choose a political position and don't have it in the study, it can be manipulated by the political sphere in order to legitimize certain arguments, while if the activist component is too strong, there is a danger of knowledge becoming incommensurable and biased. As social scientists and citizens, anthropologists have a responsibility to collaboratively help and intervene in the lives and problems that are their object of study, if the community in question wants them to.